Hello, everyone. My name is Alishba Farouk, and today I'll be leading a workshop for natIgnite on no code tools for accessibility. So, before we jump in, a little bit about me. I'm a data scientist by profession, and I have a bachelor's of science with a specialization in math from the University of Alberta. And currently, I'm a volunteer with NAT as a UX UI design associate. So before I get into the content, I'll go over what we'll discuss today. So I'll start by defining what no-code and low-code tools are. Then we'll look at how they can help with accessibility specifically. After that, we'll look at some of the key features of accessible tech and how no-code tools help non-technical creators. And finally, I'll briefly go over how you can use this in your projects for natIgnite. So, what are no-code tools? So, no code tools are rapid application development approaches that enable you to build through building blocks like drag and drop, pull down menu interfaces, and point and click. While low code tools, they enable you to do the same thing but with building through building blocks, but they allow users to add code over top that auto generated code that the building blocks result in. So the main distinguishing factor is, of course, the amount of coding you need to do in both. But Forrester distinguishes the two from their target users. So low code applications are primarily targeting full time and part time developers since they do require some coding knowledge. And then no code tools target business users or any non technical users or citizen developers, as it allows them to build with coding without coding knowledge. So, yeah. And so then some backstory on how these tools rose to democratize today's tech. There was a big shift in no code tools in the early 2000s and 2010s when website building tools like WordPress, Shopify, and Squarespace came out. So this really allowed non-technical folk to break into the space. But the 2020s really brought a rapid increase in these low code, no code tools across many categories, not just websites, but mobile apps, automations, and many more. There's some clear reasons behind the growth of these tools, one of which being the faster time to market for digital tools. So, lots of organizations saw up, some research shows some organizations saw up to 90% reduction in development time. So, what took previously months to make a product or tool, it now took weeks. And then, second, another reason is cost savings and resource efficiency. So, organizations saw a lot of savings and instead in using no code tools versus hiring professional developers. But not only that, but also in saving on development expenses by implementing no code tools instead. So, it was more cost efficient to maintain these tools using no code tools than with developers traditionally. So now it's a recognized industry with a growing job market around it. So it is quickly becoming a necessary skill to know. Now I'll go over some examples of tools, and maybe it might not be that all of these are applicable to you guys in your projects, but they're still good to know and to play around with regardless. So with no code tools, you have Softer. Here you can create a lot of powerful websites and web apps by syncing it to a database. And then you can drag and drop with the interface. You can use the drag and drop interface. So it's really useful for building client portals because it offers user authentication, role-based access, and a lot of those capabilities. But a downside is that there's no built-in database and there's some limited options for importing the data. So I think it's only Airtable, Google Sheets, and SQL, which if that works for you, that might not be an issue. And there is limited customization and functionality because it is no code. But then we have Bubble, which is a full stack no code tool. But it gives you control over the design, data, logic, all of it in one place. You can even interact with the database through a visual interface. So it's very helpful that you get a lot of control, but the thing is, there is a big learning curve, which, depending on your guys' needs, might not be worth it if you haven't worked with it before or given the time constraint that you guys are on. So that is something to consider when picking your tool. We then have Glide, which is more intuitive. It's great for turning Google Sheets and Airtable and SQL databases into apps. And you can use it either on the app can be used either on desktop or web. It's really good for that, but it does lack customization since you can only use the designs on the website. And then you have Moment. It's commonly used for building AI features into your app, but it is a full stack no code tool. However, it does have fewer templates and plugins since it's kind of on a smaller um, ecosystem, but it's still a great option if you're considering that. And then we have WeWeb. And I know I skipped Xano, but it kind of ties into WeWeb. But WeWeb is a no code front end tool. So if you have a design focused project, it's really great for that. Or if you want to pair, if you want to do the back end yourself, or you have another tool you want to pair the back end with, it's really great for that. But if you are looking for a full stack tool, this might not be it for you. You would have to pair it with something else or do the back end yourself. So pairing it with yourself, you could do it with Xano, which is a back end tool. Another nice thing about WeWeb is that you can export the code and you can host the app from anywhere. And then we have examples of some low code tools. I included WeWeb because I think you can add some code on top. You can make it low code or work with the no code, which is why I added it to both. But we have Microsoft Power Apps, and that, of course, integrates with the Microsoft ecosystem, and it focuses on being able to rapidly develop an app. So it's really great for web and mobile apps, but it is limited to just the Microsoft ecosystem. So if that doesn't work for you, that might be something to consider. Then you have Mendix, it uses a single model to develop web and mobile apps, and you can integrate multiple systems into it, but I think it has a steeper learning curve than Power Apps. And then you have AppSheet, which is by Google, and you can create custom apps with spreadsheets and databases. So it's great if you have more dashboards and reports that you want to build, rather than apps. But it's still a great option, and I'm sure there's lots of uses for it out there. And then you have OutSystems. This one, I believe I've heard, is a little bit more complicated. It's useful for deploying enterprise grade mobile apps, but I included it in here just in case you're curious, you want to explore it, and see what it does. But yeah, so these are some examples of no code, low code tools that you guys could look into. But how do these tools help with accessibility? So, one large benefit is that these tools have accessibility features built into them, like alternative text, keyboard navigation, color contrast settings. They're already built into the no code tool. It takes care of that. You kind of just have to ensure that the result is, in fact, accessible. And then another big benefit is, as we previously discussed, it is, of course, more cost effective, time efficient to work with no code tools. The rapid development life cycle allows a lot of small businesses, grassroots organizations, nonprofits to build faster and with less resources, especially if they can't afford a large or complex development team. So this cost efficiency kind of comes in with the fact that no code tools, you'll see that I think almost all of them or most of them have free tiers that allow you that'll allow for basic builds, and some of them, the basic free tier is quite nice. You get access to a lot of features, but if you do want something more complex, they also have affordable subscription models, which are I'm not sure of the exact prices, but I think they range between 20 to 40 dollars, maybe more. But they're still more affordable than hiring developers and traditional developer teams if you don't have um, the finances for that. And then finally, I would argue that this is one of the biggest benefits, but it it reduces barriers to entry. So I wouldn't say that these tools necessarily take accessibility considerations out of the hands of developers, but I would say that they share this responsibility of accessibility with non technical people as well. And this includes people with disabilities themselves. It allows for lived experiences to help build these products, and it creates an opportunity to build more relevant solutions and tools. And I've mentioned this, I will be talking about this a little bit more later on to the presentation, but yeah. So these are some resources that are worth checking out when considering what accessibility is. So there's lots out there. These are just a few to name in case you're looking on like the guidelines and what kind of what to follow when making sure things are accessible. I will be mentioning some tools in this next session that will help you with checking for accessibility. But yeah, so what are some key features in accessibility? So, one thing I will say is that accessibility doesn't just target people with cognitive, motor, hearing, visual, or any other disabilities like that, but also those that are in rural areas with unstable internet, maybe not a lot of access to internet in general. Um, Maybe even people that where English isn't their first language, like um, things like that. So that's something to keep in mind. So, one key feature of accessibility is readability. So, you got to make sure that your tool is easily understood by the user, regardless of their vision, cognitive ability, or language background. So, one thing would be to focus on the font size. The standard minimum is 16 points for the body text. So anything smaller would kind of force someone to strain their eyes or zoom in, and that would make it harder for people with low vision or reading difficulties to understand what's being said. And then another folk tip would be to focus on making sure your heading is very distinct from your body text. So if your body is 16 points, don't make your heading 17, a size 17. Make sure it's proportionally larger and distinct from the body text. And a good way to check this is scan your page and make sure you can kind of build a page hierarchy at a glance. You can tell what the header is, what the subheader is, what the text, where the text, like, sorry, what part is the text. Make sure to be able to do that, those types of things. I would also avoid using um, thin fonts, maybe even like loopy cursive fonts, anything that's hard to read, because it can be very difficult for people with dyslexia or other visual impairments to understand what is being read if the font is a little complicated or even just too thin. Um, so make sure you're keeping that in mind when choosing your theme and branding. And then finally, line spacing ties into that. It just improves readability for users. And then another focus is contrast ratios, which I think is quite commonly discussed. But essentially, make sure your text color and your background color have enough of a contrast so that people with visual impairments can easily read the content. I would say that this ties in to also your icons, any visual assets that your product has. So I won't go exactly into the guidelines um, because they can be quite like technical and specific, but um, there's lots of guidelines online. Web content accessibility guidelines sets the standard. You can use a contrast checker, which I would highly recommend. It would make it much easier. WebAIM has a contrast checker. You can use an analyzer app online. So these are some tools worth looking into. And then finally, I would focus on the language you use as another aspect of readability. Sorry. So another focus of readability is the language you use. The aim is to use plain language primarily to make it easier for your users to understand the content on their first pass over. So it's especially helpful for those whose primary language is not English. So generally, just some good practices: use short sentences. Make sure they're not so long that you're kind of losing the message as you keep reading. Use an active voice and kind of, I would consider it like a call to action. Um, So click the button to submit your application. Click here to beginning an application instead of the button should be clicked or XYZ, things like that. I would avoid unexplained acronyms, use and try to use a common everyday words if possible. So a good thing to remember is to remember the audience you're building this product for. So if this was a research paper or something highly that had highly technical content, then maybe advanced language makes more sense. But this is you have to remember you're building this product for the general audience. So you should use language that a large what like a wide array of people will understand. Hopefully everyone. So there's a lot of tools you can use to analyze your text. Grammarly Pro, I think, would even work if you have Pro. The free version, Hemingway app is another one, but there's like lots out there. And then another feature of accessibility is having good navigation. So this is essential for people that rely on any assistive technology or keyboard access to access the website or app. So one aspect of this is having a logical page structure and consistent layouts throughout your product. So have a clear hierarchy of headings. So like we mentioned before, um, your headings are distinct from the body text, but make sure like your title is the largest, and then your sections have the uh, second largest headings, and then your subsections have the third largest, and that hierarchy follows throughout, and it stays consistent. So it'll help screen readers to jump to whatever relevant content that they want. And then make sure you have a uniform layout throughout. So this is especially, sorry, with icons and buttons. If you have like a profile button, settings, navigation bar, try to keep those consistent throughout, because those with cognitive disabilities rely on the predictability and the pattern recognition that brings. So next we have keyboard navigability. So users may that have conditions preventing traditional mouse usage will probably tab through the website and use the navigation keys and the space and or enter key to navigate with the elements. So a good question is to ask yourself, can a user navigate my app with just the keyboard? And maybe even try it out. And if you ever had to use your mouse to do something, then maybe revisit this. And another thing I would say is ensure you have a focus indicator around the element you currently have selected when you're using the keyboard to navigate. So if you use the tab button, you'll see that there's a little bar shows up around whatever button it highlights. Um, Make sure you have that. It's quite key to understanding for people using the keyboard to know where they are. But the good news is no code tools, I think do take care of this, but test it out, make sure it works properly before submitting your project. It's good to know. And tied into that, we have skip links. So these are hidden by default and they show up at the top of the page when you first press tab. And it essentially helps you skip to the content you want to see, you want to go to. And again, if you've used you use the tab button to go through pages, you'll see you have to press tab like a bunch of times to get to what you want to get to. So imagine doing that every time you use the computer on every single page. So the flow of using the app would be heavily disrupted if I'm just pressing tab multiple times to get to what I need to get to. So again, this is very easy to implement with no code tools, but it's another accessibility feature to keep in mind when building your product. And finally, this one's quite simple, but it can be easily forgotten. Have clear headings and descriptive button labels. So don't just rely on color to convey a message, accompany it with an icon and a descriptive label. I would say a user should be able to tell and what the button or does just by reading the heading or the label and not having any other context. So I should know that when I click this button, it's going to lead me to the application. Um, instead of having to read through some other things to figure out what it does. Now, finally, we have usability. So if your app works, but it's not really usable in the real world, then it probably won't be a useful app. So some things to consider are mobile responsiveness. And this kind of ties into my initial point about accessibility not just being about individuals with physical or cognitive disabilities or hearing or vision impairments, but also individuals from under resourced communities that may not have access to internet either through a phone or older products. Um, so ensure your tool is just as accessible on a laptop as it is on a phone. So I would argue that so a tool that looks great on a laptop, but it's breaking on a smaller screen would not be as accessible of a tool. So make sure you can open your product on the phone. You don't need to zoom in, squint, or turn your phone horizontal, or even like give up and like open your laptop instead because it just won't work. These are things to keep an eye out for. Um, I would make sure anything you're touching or clicking on the laptop, you should be able to easily tap on your phone and should be large enough that you can tap them. But make sure you're not making everything too large because that would also affect easily being able to read. Make sure the layout, you can easily scroll through and get the same messaging across with a more concise layout on the phone. So most no code tools will handle the mobile responsiveness automatically, but preview it, um, test it out. Just keep that in mind. Another area to focus on is load time and performance. And I understand that there's only so much you can do to control this issue, but there are some practices to ensure that your product loads easily, especially for people that have low bandwidth or poor internet connection, whether they're because they're in a rural area or just areas with limited internet connection. So, some practical steps: compress your images. There's lots of tools online to compress them before uploading. Avoid autoplay or animations on the page load. Minimize the number of third party like plugins and widgets. Good to use, but just not so many that it makes it like hard to load. Used text based layouts instead of like heavy image reliant designs where possible. Of course, everything works in balance. But yeah. And then a good tool to audit just your accessibility in general and also your performance is Google Lighthouse. It's a free tool. It's quick. So I think this is a very good tool for you guys to just have in your belt when checking if your website is accessible and also if it's performing, like the performance is good. And then finally, it's a good idea to have clear error messages and instructions on your forms. And I mention this because um, it's essentially how people get involved through signing up, and it can be a common pain point in accessibility design. So make sure every field has a descriptive label for each form. Um, so just having the placeholder text in the field that kind of goes away when you start typing. So people that have screen readers or any cognitive disabilities, this affects them. So I know it's probably common practice to have like a description or a label, but good to remember regardless. And then make sure your error messages are clearly identifying which field has the error. You're marking the required fields. It's just good to know that if these tools aren't there, they have accessibility. It causes issues with accessibility. But no code tools should do have forms that um, no code tools can build these forms for you and handle the errors. But you would still have to ensure that the other considerations are taken into account. Okay, now finally, how does this help non-technical creators? I briefly mentioned this at the beginning, but um, currently, there's some people being excluded from building technology because of high costs. Um, traditionally and high costs, steep learning curves, educational barriers. Traditionally, the technology industry has had a lot of, it's mainly been able bodied individuals that are formally educated. And so, as a result, whether intentional or not, it results in tools that kind of tailor um, to that demographic. And so it leaves behind um, a lot of other individuals. And so there are some barriers to traditional software development that prevent these individuals from getting involved in the traditional sense. So there's high costs to learning and getting a degree. And it's time sensitive. It's not universally accessible. Coding boot camps are faster, but they're still expensive, and they do have a time commitment. And then there's economic barriers. So just hiring a developer to build a tool can be expensive, and people might not have that um, the ability to do that. So that kind of puts custom technology out of reach for a lot of community organizations, small profits, individuals. There's geographic barriers, tech and tech education and developer communities are concentrated in urban areas. So rural communities, remote regions, they're all being there's a significant gap in the infrastructure and training. So and finally, one thing that's important to mention is disability related barriers. So you'll see that traditional coding, um, you do it in IDEs, you do it in like typing, attending in person boot camps, things like that. Um, so these are not always accessible to people with certain disabilities, preventing them from building tools that target accessibility. So that is something that's important to take into consideration. So this becomes there's a technological landscape where there's tools being built that are not serving the underserved communities, um, and so those areas are being marginalized. And then so these no code tools shift the power into the hands of those peoples. It drops the barrier to entry from years of training to just maybe a week, an afternoon, a couple days. So that introduces a whole new type of builder to this space. So you can have community organizers, educators, health workers, healthcare workers, people with disabilities, virtually. Like so many more communities can build tools um, that they have been needing but weren't able to build before. So you have volunteer coordination tools, you have um, accessible course material for teachers, you have people with disabilities addressing like barriers and addressing problems that they faced personally and being able to build solutions that they know are needed. So, accessibility checkers, scheduling tools, things like that. Even non English speakers, a lot. There is a lot of people that are non English speaking. So, you can build tools in your own languages. For your own communities without relying on a translator or a third person to understand your needs. So there's lots of organizations that are already doing work in building no code um, that bring no code builders together to create technical solutions for social good. And some of these, to name a few, are No Code for Good, Microsoft's AI for Accessibility program, Code for America. Another good one to mention that I haven't put on here is it's I think called the Ali project, the A11Y project. So they have a lot of open source like um, resources that make web accessibility knowledge approachable. So that might be a really good tool for you guys to look into when building your products. So this really shifts the dynamic to um, not just technical people building for others, but people building tools that they themselves need, which is really great. And then finally, how can you guys apply this in your projects now? So I would recommend, before getting into your tools and deciding what you want to work on, deciding what tools you want to use, I would determine what is the MVP of your project. So who's your target user? What are the pain points? What are you trying to solve? What is the main feature in your tool that solves this? And keep it concise, keep it detailed. Make sure you're not trying to address many different users, different types of users. Make sure you're not trying to address many different problems, because the more you expand on it and try to do a lot at once, the less you'll be able to actually build out. So it's best to just keep it to one problem, one type of user, one main feature with a couple other additions, maybe if you have time, and then kind of build your way out from that. I say this because then once you have a very good like vision of what you want the product to look like, and you have a detailed description of what you need, what the needs are, I think you'll figure out what kind of tool you need then itself. Um, you'll know that, okay, this is what I need from a tool, and you'll be able to pick a better tool um, afterwards. And so this is where no code tools come in. I would highly recommend that you guys look into it and consider playing around with these tools. This is the time to do so. And not only because it'll be good to know a new tool, but also because um, it'll save you guys a lot of time, while instead of debugging and setting up code and making sure it runs and works, you can spend your time making sure you're building a problem, you're building a solution that is useful, that is effective, and you're addressing those accessibility needs that you weren't able to do otherwise through traditional coding because your time was taken up with coding. So I would highly recommend to leverage these tools. You might even be able to build out more features because you're saving your times on these. Um, and yeah, and then I would just understand what the judges are looking for. Um, Make sure you're addressing the accessibility needs and the criteria that's set out, and make sure you just have a polished product. At the end of the day, it is a very short time constraint, and that's understood. Um, so, which is why kind of you go back to the MVP and make sure you have something that you can build within this time frame, and then kind of expand on that if you have the time. So yeah, I would say understand what the judges are looking for and keep that in mind when building your product. And yeah, I think that is everything from me. These are just some references I looked at while doing this workshop, getting this workshop prepped. But that's it from me. I hope everyone was able to get something valuable from this, and all the best for your guys' projects.